had some grapes this morning because I forgot to start the recording to record this sermon. So everything before this part has not been recorded, but we got it now. So I need to eat my grapes. So again, grapes play a significant role in our health and in our diet. And I want you to just put a pencil right there as we dive into the word. Today we're continuing in our series in John, and we're going to start with John chapter 2, verse 1. Something significant is happening here. And as I put this scripture on the screen for you, John chapter 2, verse 1. And before I read it, let me just give you a little bit of background as we get right into it. Well, let's just read the text and we'll go right there. It says, on the third day, there was a wedding in Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. What is the backdrop for what is happening here? Here, Canaan. Canaan is a city that is near his birth town, and Canaan is a rival city that looks down on Nazareth. And now, as he's about to start his ministry here in the book of John, he makes his way to this city. And the first point that I want to illustrate in this sermon is that Jesus cares about your daily affairs. Jesus' first sign, first miracle does not occur inside of a synagogue. It does not occur inside of church. It does not even occur in Jerusalem. It occurs in a city called Canaan. There, it says here that the mother of Jesus was there. We're just going to do a little bit of teaching right there. In the book of John, the mother of Jesus appears twice. Once at the start of his ministry, and the last time at the end when he's going to the cross. That's the only time the author of John mentions the mother of Jesus. And this narrative of Jesus going to Canaan and this familiar story that we're about to unpack of the wedding feast only occurs here in the book of John. Nowhere else do you find this story. And as I stated, the first point here is that Jesus cares about our daily affairs. Jesus is now going to a wedding, an event that happens normally in a day of affairs. This is where Jesus starts his ministry. The commentary says here, as we put up John chapter 2, verse 2, we're going to read a little more details. We'll put John chapter 2, verse 2 on the screen. It says, Jesus was also invited to the wedding with his disciples. Very interesting. You want to underline this. Jesus now is invited to a wedding. He shows up with his 12 new friends. This is a familiar affair, and weddings during that time were affairs that were quite expensive. Today, you may spend $15,000, $20,000 on a wedding, but it happens in one evening. I remember my wedding. We planned it. The wedding ceremony was on a Sunday morning, the reception following right afterwards. But by afternoon, by 5 o'clock, we told everyone, you don't have to go home. You just got to leave here because the ceremony is over. But in antiquity, a wedding event took place over 7 days. And so it was an extremely expensive affair because you were entertaining your guests, your friends, your family for a period of 7 days. And for those 7 days, everything that they needed, you provided for them. So now when you see this story taking place, Mom, the mother of Jesus, she's seeing her son come in with the 12 disciples after not seeing him for a period of time. And let me try to paint this picture for you. Let me slow this down for you. You see, Mom, Mary, the mother of Jesus, she remembered the promise that the angel said that here unto you a child is born. I'm paraphrasing. I'm doing a horrible job paraphrasing it. But she remembers that the angel promised that her son would be the savior of the world. And for all his 30 years, Jesus lived a normal life, nothing extraordinary. And now she may have begun to have questions. And I'm just trying to slow the story and I can't put myself in her shoes, but I imagine if I was a brother to Jesus, for 30 years you here's the Messiah, and he hasn't done anything. He's been a carpenter, he's been a great son, but he's done nothing remarkable up to this point. And now before the wedding, just a while before the wedding, you hear that Jesus makes these 12 new friends, and these friends are calling him the Messiah. We have found the Messiah. And as these words are ringing in the friend circle, mom hears it. She remembers what the angel said those 30 some years earlier, that indeed Jesus is the Messiah. So as he's coming to this wedding, she's wondering, now that others are starting to follow him, is now the time that he's going to reveal who he is to everyone. Let's put up that verse again. John chapter 2, verse 2. And now when wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, they have no wine. Up to this point, Jesus has not shown that he could do anything. He hasn't flexed his supernatural muscles. He hasn't gone around doing things contrary to what an apocrypher says. There's a apocryphal book that says that when he was a kid, he was doing these miracles, but there's no biblical record that supports this. But mom sees him with the 12 followers, and she responds, she says, son, they ran out of wine. Now, some of the commentaries suggest that the mother of Jesus had a part to play in organizing the wedding ceremony. And you can imagine running out of supplies would be a huge embarrassment. And so when she lets her son know that they ran out of wine, she knows that her son has always been a dutiful son. He's always been very resourceful. She doesn't know what's going to happen, but she simply says, son, they've run out of wine. John chapter 2, verse 3. The second point that I bring to your attention is that Jesus is the solution. Jesus is the solution for all of our problems. Let's put that scripture up on the screen. John chapter 2, verse 3. And Jesus said to her, woman, okay, let's go right to that verse. She says, woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come. Now, won't go into it. Many have preached on this subject before about the exchange between mom and Jesus. Was it polite? Was it rude? We won't spend time there. But what we will lean into is the fact that Jesus is very conscious of his timing, his sense of timing. Jesus here is not going to hasten his suffering. He's not going to hasten his mission. So he tells his mom simply, Mom, my time has not yet come. One thing that I want you to remember as we look at this passage here is that everything that Jesus does in the book of John has a specific purpose, and it's larger than the purpose before. As a matter of fact, the commentary, the expositor's commentary suggests that every miracle that Jesus does in the book of John, which he does 7 of them, they're really miraculous parables. There's teaching moments in them, and they're not just for the moment, but they serve a larger purpose. So now we need to pay close attention to what is happening here. But the thing that we want to remember is Jesus does not hasten his suffering. He doesn't hasten his moment. I know as we look back in 2020, there are many believers who would hasten their suffering. They would say words like, they are persecuting me. That is not the character of Jesus. He does not hasten his suffering, does not call to it, doesn't call light to these things. In fact, he knows carefully his time. He doesn't say it. Now let's put up the verse again. We're going to continue. John chapter 2, verse 4. We'll put that on the screen. And it says, and he says, my hour has not come. Let's look at the next verse. And his mother said to the servants, do whatever he tells you. One thing that we need to remember as we understand that Jesus is the solution is we need to have implicit trust in Jesus. You see, Jesus' mom, not knowing what he was about to do, she simply says to the servants, do whatever he says to do. She doesn't know what's going to happen next. Jesus has not given any sign, but she trusts. She's seen a look in his eyes. She trusts that whatever is going to happen, something's going to happen. She trusts explicitly in Jesus. The question that I want to ask to you today is, do you trust in Jesus when you don't know what the outcome is going to be? Can Jesus trust you to trust him when you don't know what the outcome of the surgery is going to be? Can Jesus trust you to trust him when you don't know what the future holds? You see, Jesus' mother leaves us an example. She trusts her son even though she's never seen him do anything, but she knows him and she trusts him explicitly. I suggest to you that we need to get to a place where we trust Jesus not based on what he's going to do, but because of who he is. Now, there are several things that are happening here as we're looking at John chapter 2. I'm going to pause here and do a little teaching moment. You see, there are several things here that we need to keep in mind. The writer in John starts the phrase in John chapter 2 with, and on the third day. You see, in the book of John, in the Gospel of John, there are many connections to creation. And when he pens these words on the third day, he's drawing to light something that happened in Genesis chapter 1. You see, on the third day of creation, Jesus, the Word, which we find in John chapter 1 as well, the Word had spoken three things into existence. And for those who remember my series on creation, you remember that on the first day of creation, and if you know it, you can type it in the chat room. What did God create on the first day of creation? I'm throwing this out. And if you're watching on YouTube right now, you can type it in the chat room as well. The question is, what did he create on the first day? Anyone want to take a stab at it? Okay. As I'm waiting for our saints to type, I will give you the answer. So you can think about what he created on the second day. But on the first day, God created light. Very important. On the second day, he creates what? He separates the waters. He creates water, right? And separates the water from the land. It's the second day. And then on the third day, he creates all the vegetables. In essence, by the third day of creation, God had placed into creation everything that we need to live. So as a reader of John chapter 2, when you read on the third day, you draw those parallels to Genesis chapter 1, and you will see that what is about to happen speaks volumes. Now, I'm going to connect those dots to you in just a moment. On the third day also, there are other things that happen. What happened on the third day in the biblical narrative, in the book of John, in all the Gospels? On the third day, Jesus resurrected. He came back to life. So here we have a connection to the third day where he makes provision for everything for life. And then on the third day, he comes back to life with new life. Okay, all right. Let me unpack this. Let's keep looking. What are we at? John chapter 2, verse 6. We're going to put that scripture up on the screen for us. John chapter 2, verse 6. Let's put that on the screen for us, and let's take a look at it. And it says, now there were six stone water jars there for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 to 30 gallons. What is significant here is those stone jars that were a part of the Jewish rites of purification. They were sitting there empty, doing nothing. However, as we look at the narrative, what we're going to learn from this is in John chapter 2, verse 6, is that when Jesus is present, even relics, religious relics, can take on new life because of the presence of Jesus. Now here it says here that these things carried 20 to 30 gallons each. So there's a lot of space. Now Jesus says in verse 7, John chapter 2, verse 7, he says, Jesus said to the servants, fill the jars with water. Put that verse on the screen. And they filled them to the brim. Now there's something that I want you to pay attention to. What the writer is conveying to us is that Jesus is a God of abundance. 30 gallons each, 6 jars. He tells them to fill them to the brim. Normally when we take our communion service at church, we usually get a little glass, right? It's a little easy to separate, to share a little glass. But when we look at Jesus, we see that he provides in abundance. So he tells them to fill them to the brim with water. Then verse chapter 8, let's look at Not chapter 8. Let's look at verse 8, John chapter 2, verse 8. And he said to them, now draw some out and take it to the master of the feast. And so he took it. And verse number 9, we'll keep reading right to the next verse. And he says, and when the master of the feast tasted, the water now became wine, did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. The master of the feast called the bridegroom. Let's keep reading. Let's keep reading here. We're going to draw this in. And he says, and he said to them, everyone who serves good wine first, everyone serves the good wine first. And when people have drunk freely, then the poor wine. But you have kept the good wine until now. Forgive me, I'll read this over again, get it right. Everyone serves the good wine first, and when people have drunk freely, then the poor wine. But you have kept the good wine until now. Something significant is happening here. Jesus has the servants fill up these jars, 6 jars, 30 gallons each, fills them up with water. He tells them to pour it out, and he pours out wine, fresh wine. Now, I won't get into the debate as to is it fermented wine or not fermented wine, but what we do know, and this I will share from one of my classes in the seminary, let me tell you a little bit about antiquity. Back in the day, in the time that Jesus lived, you preserved grape juice, not in a refrigerator, but in the earth. So you had these cisterns and you would preserve it under the earth. And so when you got the grape juice from the vine and you freshly pressed it, you would put it in these wine skins and you would bury it under the earth. And when the wine was fresh, it had very little or no alcoholic content, but it was fresh. That means it was freshly pressed. But when you preserved it, the longer it stayed underground, the staler it would get. It would start to ferment. Now, it's not fermenting like we do here in America where we make it 5%, 10%, 30% proof. In fact, you don't want to hold it that long. But in essence, when you serve grape juice, the people who had the better cooling system will be able to offer you fresh grape juice. So here, what is happening here, Jesus is now taking this water, turning it into wine, but there's a significance to this. If I can connect the dots to you, let me try to connect it to you. This wine that Jesus is providing, as a reader, you need to also connect it to what happens at Jesus at the close of his ministry. Let me try to bring it into you. Let me try to make sense of this for you. It says here, when Jesus was going to the cross, in John chapter 19, verse 28 and 29, Jesus was given sour wine. I'm going to connect this to you. Stick with me, bear with me here. Jesus provides the earth fresh wine, and at the close of his ministry, the world gives him sour wine when he is thirsty. Do you see what is happening here? Jesus wants to give you the very best, even though we just want to give him sour wine. And it's also interesting that when Jesus dies on the cross, when he's pierced in the side, what comes out of him is water and blood. So as the reader of the Gospel of John, you see the bookends at the start of his ministry. He takes water and turns it into wine. At the end of his ministry, there's water and there's blood. And Jesus is the one that provides salvation through his ministry. He makes the exchange. He takes what we give him, that sour wine, and he turns it around and makes it into fresh wine. Now, what is the point that Jesus is trying to make to us? Here it says, the third point in this sermon is that with Jesus, all things are made new. He takes these lifeless religious relics and he converts them into agents of providing fresh wine. And the big idea that Jesus is trying to convey to us is that with time, everything gets better with Jesus. You see, at the start of the wedding, they started out serving whatever they were serving. And normally they serve, in this wedding, they serve the the good wine, right? And then after time, they would serve out once everyone has drunk and they're full and they can't taste as much and they're satiated. Then they pour out the poor wine, so you can't tell the difference between the two. But what Jesus has done is he's flipped the script. They put out the good wine and Jesus offers them something even better, the best wine. And what's this, the significance for us is that a relationship with Jesus gets better with time. So what does all of this mean? Let's look at John chapter 2, verse 11 as I bring this into a close. We're going to connect the dots and bring it to a close. It says, this, the first of his signs, Jesus did at Cana in Galilee and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. If you missed everything that I've said before, I want you to just pay attention to this. John chapter 1 ends with this, the disciples leaving everything to follow him and proclaiming that he is the master. He is the Messiah. They left everything to follow him. He is the Messiah. They already have a belief in him. Now, after this experience where they see Jesus command over nature, being able to create anew, provide new life, the result is that they believe in him more. You see, in the book of John, there are three reactions that people have when they see a miracle that Jesus does. There's one of three ways that they react. The first one is they refuse to believe him, period. They see something, they don't believe him at all. And we are not different today. Jesus can provide a miracle for you. He can give you a new job. He can provide a new opportunity for you. And yet, there are still Christians today, or people, I should say, that don't believe in him. The first reaction is not believing at all. There are a second group of people that they believe in the signs instead of believing in him. How many times do we focus on what Jesus can do, but not really focusing on the fact that Jesus is, those signs are just to point us to who he is. We get wrapped up with what he's done, but we don't continue to focus on who he is. Let me give you an illustration. This is a poorly adapted illustration, but it'll drive the point home. Through technology, we navigate from point A to point B. And the way we do so, we have our phones, whether it's an Android or an iPhone, we punch in an address. Most of us don't walk around with maps anymore. We simply punch in an address on our phones, and that phone will bring us to our destination. So if I'm going to church, I will punch in the address of the church, 2437 Jefferson Avenue, put that in my GPS, and then make my way to church. When I arrive at my destination and the GPS shows that I've arrived at my location, I don't think to myself, boom, I've arrived, I'm done, I'm here, I'm good. The address just brings me to the location that I'm going to, but then I still have to get out the car and go into the location for the purpose of what I want to do at that location. Many of us, we focus on arriving at that destination, but we don't get out the car to go into the location to fellowship with Jesus, to get to know him more. And lastly, there are those who believe in what the signs point to, that Jesus is indeed the Christ. What happened in John chapter 2, in the miracle of turning water into wine, is that the disciples now went to more belief in who Jesus is. They don't get everything right, but here they believe more. Their belief in him is strengthened. And over the passage of time, their belief in him will strengthen. My question for us as we draw this sermon to a close is, God has given you, for some of us, 30 years, 40 years, even 50 years of life. Has each experience in your life led you to believe more and more in Jesus? Are you growing in your faith that everything that you go through, you look at these indications as just signs that point to the fact that Jesus is real? Church, we need to get to that point where Jesus is real for each one of us individually, and where the things that he does in our lives, we don't get hung up on just those things, but we realize those are just pointers to a real relationship with him. The question that I leave you today simply is, will you continue to believe in Jesus? You see, the book of John, if I bring this home, is just to make this point clear. The book of John was written to an audience of believers already. As we shared before in the start of this series, the book of John was written to an audience so that they can continue believing in Jesus without a connection to an apostle that's seen Jesus. But it's also written to an audience like us who, even without seeing an apostle, every sign that Jesus does in our lives is to strengthen our belief in who he is, that Jesus is indeed the Messiah. And so my prayer for you simply as you go through the week is that with each experience, every grace that God extends to you, may that be just a pointer that he is real. Every mercy that he extends to you, you get up in the morning, the sun is shining, that's just a pointer that Jesus is real. He brings you safely to where you need to go. That's just a pointer that he is real. So that you, in everything that you do, your faith in him is so strong that, like the Apostle Paul, you can go by yourself, face a difficult situation, and your faith not waver. Of the 12 disciples, at the end of their journey, one would commit suicide. He doesn't believe in who Jesus is. The 11 others would die. 10 of the 11 would die horrible deaths. But in it, they had gotten to a point that their belief in Jesus was so strong that regardless of what happened to them, their faith was not going to be shaken. They hung fast, steadfast to their belief in Jesus and the promise that he is coming soon. The Apostle Paul, who joins the ranks, he also dies a tragic death. And the last living apostle, who lives the longest, he writes his book to give us the assurance that we can believe in Jesus. As this service draws to a close, we're going to play this song. And the song is The Blood. The blood, and he lives. As we listen to the words of the song, may we meditate on the fact that the signs that Jesus performs in our lives is simply to point to him. And the ultimate sign was done at the cross. And that a reminder that Jesus lives.